Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. So from our previous two sessions, we embarked on the journey to make use of Spring Cloud features, and we managed to do the configuration server, which is the Spring Cloud config, and then we made the Spring Cloud config client, and configured our discovery server, which is making use of Eureka to fetch configurations from the config server. And then thereafter we proceeded and configured our department service to be able to make use of the config server also to just locate the different configurations that are within the config repo. And now for this particular case, we are making use of externalized configuration management. Now making use of the config server allows us to manage those particular configuration in a way that we can be able to update the repositories with the configurations independently from the application server. So once the application server is restarted, it automatically be able to be served with the new changes. So today we'll be looking at the intelligent routing that is provided by Spring Cloud. So we'll be looking at the Spring Cloud homepage. As you can see here, we have the Spring Cloud, and the first feature that we made use was the distributed or fashion configuration, and we did the second one whereby we are doing the discovery server that is using the Eureka and Netflix, and then from there we are going to proceed and do routing. Now routing is going to be evident whenever we be making use of more than one instance, but then for routing we are going to expose for our microservices, we are going to expose one port and one particular host or IP for all our services. So within the microservice architecture, we are going to configure routing, which will be able to send requests dependent on the different configuration that you are going to have. So I'll be able to show you how also that we can make use of the documentation to achieve this particular intelligent routing. So with that, let's get started. Alright, so we are going to get started by creating a new service which will be making use of as the router for all our services. And for that, you just head over the Spring Cloud section and then scroll down and click on the Spring Cloud Gateway. So I'm going to click this one, and for this case you can be able to see that the Spring Cloud Gateway, it's a library for building API gateways on top of Spring Web Flux or the Spring Web MVC. So for now we are going to make use of the reactive version of the Spring Cloud Gateway so that we can be able to make use of the features of the reactive framework. And in this case, we want to provide an effective or efficient way to route APIs across and also address cross-cutting concerns. So we'll be able to see how then can we be able to introduce Spring security and also monitoring and resilience within the API gateway, and in that case we be able to make all our microservices resilient whenever we are making use of HTTP calls. So with that, let's proceed to our workspace and start a new project. So for this case, I'm going to enable a few things here. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-P and enable screencast mode so that you can be able to see the different shortcuts that I'm using. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is going to be Control-Shift-P, and in this case it's going to be we create a new Maven project. At the same time, if you can't see it on the recently used, you can just search for Spring create Maven project. So you'll be able to have that listed. So Spring Initializer, just search for Spring Initializer, and you have an option for creating a Maven project. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to, for now, I'm going to make use of 3.26, and now in the coming sessions we'll be able to see what is the changes between 3.26 and 3.3. But then for now, at the moment of recording this video, I want all my microservices to be using 3.26. I'm going to choose the language being Java, and for this case I'm going to give this one my package, which is going to be github.oengajohn. Then for that is going to be my group ID, and now the artifact ID is going to be the name of our service, and in this case I'm going to call it Demo API Gateway. All right. So with that, I'm going to press enter and then select the Java packaging type. Choose 17 as the Java version. So whatever we are going to require here is going to be very simple. So the first thing is that the API gateway will need to fetch configuration from the config server. That's the first thing. The other thing, it needs to register itself to the discovery service. All right. So that means we need the Spring client, Spring Cloud config client, or you can just search for config client, and this is going to give you the option to be able to connect to the Spring Cloud config server. So I'm going to select that's the first one. The second dependency that I require will be the one to register to the discovery service, and in this case I require the discovery. So I'm going just to search for discovery client, so which is going to be Eureka Discovery Client, or you can just search for Spring Cloud Discovery Service. All right. So for now, I'm going just to say it's going to be Spring Eureka Discovery Client. I'm going just to select that. All right. So with those two dependencies, the last dependency I require for this project is going to be the Spring Cloud Gateway. So I'm going just to search for Gateway. So you can see I'm going to choose the reactive gateway. So I'm going to select the second one, reactive gateway. All right. So with those three dependencies in place, I'm going to press enter and then generate the project to this particular folder and then add to workspace. All right. So now we have our demo API gateway here. So what we're going to do is just proceed and check the different configurations. You can see now it's saying that I haven't loaded this particular project. So what I'm going to do is load this particular project. So let me see how we can be able to do that. So what you're going to do is going to ensure that this one is actually corrected, and in this case what we are going to do first is going to configure our dependencies and also the version of our project. So in this case I'm going to have this one as 1.0.0, and then for that the next thing is that we'll be packaging our API gateway into a Docker image, so we require to copy the plugin for making that necessary. So in this case we are going to copy the plugin for the Jeep Maven plugin for this particular case. So we're going to introduce that additional plugin here so that we can be able to package our image. All right, now with this, what you're going to do is now load the project so that we can be able to have the dependencies resolved. So what I'm going to do is going to be Control-Shift-P, and I'm going to do Java language, clean language server workspace. And in this case, I'm going to do the load and delete option. All right, now after the restart or reloading and deleting the cache, now our application will be ready for use. In this case, what we're going to do is now start configuring our application service. So what other additional dependency I forgot? I needed to have the dependency for reading the configuration and suggesting some information. So I'm going just to copy one of the dependencies, which is the Spring Boot dependency for configuration processor. So I'm going just to add that one within my project here so that I can be able to make use of that to be able to have intelligence in terms of the configuration. So let me just proceed, and first thing we are going to do is, as usual, is going to change this particular file into YAML file. What I'm going to do is just rename this one and change the extension to .yaml. So I'm going to have this one as .yaml. Then from there, I'm going to change the application name. So it's going to be Spring:12, then application colon name 12, and then for that colon value. All right. So that is going to be the Spring Boot application name. Now let me do this. What we're going to do is that all our microservices, we want them to be exposed under one port. So what I'm going to do is just expose a single port, which is going to be server, then colon, then we are going to have port. And in this case, I'm going to run all my microservices within the service port of 7000. So that is what I'm going to do for all microservices. So all microservices will be accessed via the port of 7000. All right. So with that, we'll be good to go. So let's configure other additional information now to do with the API gateway. So I'm going to just enable the Spring Boot cast mode. And in this case, we want to configure the cloud gateway. So let me show you how you navigate the documentation for us to be able to do all this. So we are going to head over to the browser and select the Spring Cloud Gateway. And then from here, you can see that we have this particular gateway here. But then what I'm going to do is go to the Learn section and click the reference documentation. All right. Now, with this, we are going to do the Spring Cloud Gateway reactive server. Right, and then we are going to do how to include a Spring Cloud Gateway. And then from here, you can be able to see that we just require the Spring Cloud Gateway starter dependency. And also we are going to do we proceed the glossary once again, then proceed. Yeah. Now, what happens is that the Spring Cloud Gateway will be able to take the request and then be able to map it into the gateway handler. And then from there, we can make use of filters to be able to determine which service that we are going to call. All right, so let's see how to configure the different gateways. So the first thing, as you can see, this is a shortcut, and we are going to make use of predicates. Now, predicates are things that can be able to express themselves into a truth value and return a truth value. So in this case, we configure the Spring Cloud Gateway as this. So the first thing is the Spring Cloud Gateway, and then we configure what is known as the routes. So let me just show you how you're going to configure the first route of our department service. So what we need to do is go to the application and then come here under Spring and do 1, 2, and then do cloud. Let me see, gateway. Right, and to gateway. Then we are going to configure an array of routes. So we are going to have routes. Right, and then the first route we are going to have that. So we need to have the name of the route. So the first one is going to be, what is the name of the route? So in this case, ideally is the ID of the route, which is for my case, I usually treat it as the name of the service. So what we are going to do is going to express the ID here. All right. Now, what is going to be the value of this ID? I want to have the route to the department service. Right. So what I'm going to do is give the name of the service. So in this case, I'm going to just have department service. All right. So with that, there are a couple of options that I need to specify. So I need to specify whenever I call the department service, what will be the URI. Right. So the first thing that we're going to configure is going to be the URI of the department service. Then usually, if you want to configure the URI, I'd have to know the different port information. So I need to go here and check where does the department service running from. So if I go to the config repository, you'll be able to see that the department service is running on which port? It's running on port 8081. Now, what happens if I configure the URI directly? It means that I'd have tightly coupled my service and the port information to the gateway. So in case there is other ports or other services running and serving the same instance, then it will be difficult. So what I'm going to do is that instead of me using the API gateway this way, let me show you how we be able to determine the URI that we are going to call. So what we're going to do is going to be very simple. We start our service for the config server. So the first thing that we're going to do is start our config server and ensure that it's able to start and run. So I'm going to run my config server as the first thing. I'm going to ensure that I have my config server. As you can see, it's suggesting that I need to have the Spring Boot actuator dependencies, but then I'm going just to have that one later. Now, for this case, I have my service discovery, the config server. And the next service I'm going to start is going to be the discovery service. So which is going to see all my values, all the services registering themselves to this particular service. Alright, so my discovery service is starting up, and you can see that it's been able to fetch the configurations. The next thing that you're going to do is start this have to be started in this sequence order or in that particular sequence. So the next thing that we're going to do is start our department service. So I'm going just to start my department service here. Alright, so that we can be able to see if we go to the discovery service, whereby it's localhost 8761, we should be able to have all the services registered. As you can see, the department service hasn't registered, but then once that is there, its instance will be registered here. Alright, so this one is complaining because I don't have Docker. So let me just start the application, Docker desktop, so that I can be able to have access to my database. Alright, so I'm going just to start my Docker employee service. So I'm going just to start this particular image or container so that I can have my SQL running and allow my service to connect. Alright, so let's start it again. Alright, now my service has been able to start, and you can see that it has registered the name department service. Alright, so this is the status, and also the status is up within Eureka. So let's come here and refresh now this particular Eureka dashboard. And you can see that now we have our department service. Now this application name that we have here is going to be the one that we'll be making use within our API gateway, because the API gateway will be fetching this particular instance application names from this side, and then automatically once you call this particular application name, it will be able to determine where that application is running and what is the host and port, and automatically it will be able to give you the to route that particular traffic to that particular running instance. Now let's see how we are going to do that. So what we're going to do is going to be very simple here. We're going to come under the API gateway, alright, YAML file here, and then what you're going to do is that if there is more than one instance of the department service running, and which is usually the case, we need to load balance the traffic that we are receiving. So in this case, we are going to introduce LB to indicate that we are going to load balance this one, and we just need to have what? You just need to have LB and then / twice. So we are going to have / twice, and then from that we are going to specify the name of the service under the Eureka discovery. So that is the process of doing this particular specification. Now from here, how do we determine that whenever we receive any request, we need to call this particular LB or the department service? Then we need to specify the path or the predicates. Now the first predicate, we are going to make use of predicates. So I'm going just to have here predicates here. Now, what is going to be the predicate for us to be able to choose anything to go to the department service? Let me walk you through the documentation. So we go to the config server here, and then what we're going to do is we are going to do the route predicate factories. So if we go here, you'll be able to have different route predicate factories. So the first one is going to be the path. So we are going to make use of the path. So if you scroll down, you'll be able to have the path route predicate factory. So what happens is that you specify the URI of the service that you want to call, and then the predicate. What will be the path that will be liable for being called within the department service? So we need to have the path section here. So we are going to have the path, and in this case, we are going to do path equal to. Then remember, our controller for the department service is running on which path? So if we go to the controller here, you'll be able to see that our base controller for the department service is running under API/department. So what you're going to do is going to be very simple. Pick that and put it here. And then what we are going to do is that we are going to merge any path below this one, because you want to expose everything. So we are going to make use of */** to to ensure that we are able to match all the parts under API department. And with this, we'd have configured our first route. All right. So that's very simple how the routes are actually configured. Now, in that this particular service will be running, we require it to fetch this configuration from a central repository. So what we're going to do is going to the config repository, which is this one. We're going to create a file with the same name as the application name, which is going to be this one. All right. So I'm going to create that file here, new file, .yml. Remember to make use of YML, because if you use the YAML, it might result into issues whenever fetching configuration from the config repo. So what we're going to do is we create this particular value. Now that we have configured our routes, it's going to be very simple. So what you're going to do is take everything, all right, as is, and then paste it here. And then remove what is not necessary to be on the configuration server, which in this case is going to be the application name. So that's what you do. Right. Now with that, we have the Spring Cloud Gateway routes, so that our first route is this one, right? And then it's going to run the service under the port 7000. And now the next thing that we're going to do is very simple. We are going to remove any information that we have taken to the config server. As you can see, our configuration remains very simple. But then remember, this particular service will require to connect to the config server or to the discovery server for it to be able to know where the department service is running. Now, to do that, what we're going to do is going to go to the same config repo and check on the department service. What do we configure? We configured the Eureka client register with Eureka to true. So we are going to take the same configuration and put it under our API gateway. So we are going to have that here. And this one will be able to inform the service that you need to register with the discovery server. And the next thing that we're going to do is that for it to be able to know this particular configuration from the demo config repo, it has to connect to the demo configuration server. So we need to tell it, where are you getting the config server? So we are going to go and do the same thing that we did on the department service by making use of this particular section, which is going to be the config. And that is what we are going to go to the demo, the application YAML file within the API gateway, and we are going to set that here. So we are going to have config, import optional, and then config server as the service name. And then from there, we are going to specify the variable if we want to externalize the variable in terms of Docker environments, but then we are going to make use of this one as the default. That's all that we need to configure our API gateway. Lastly, we need just to confirm that the dependency that we have is not web MVC, the MVC one. So what you're going to do is just scroll up. As you can see, we have the Spring Cloud Gateway, and that is what we are going to use. But then if you make use of Spring Initializer, you might have something like MVC here, which won't work in this particular reactive nature. So whenever you have that, remember this is a web MVC, the model view controller, which is not the non-reactive one. So what you can do is just remove this particular section that way. And with that, we'll be good. Now our service is ready for start. So what I'm going to do is very simple. I'm going to restart my config repository so that it can be able to pick the new configuration. But then because I want the config repo to be able to automatically fetch those particular information, what I'm going to do for now is just restart. Then in the next section, we'll be able to configure the autoload service. Now in this case, what we're going to do is very simple. We are going to go again under the demo config repository. I'm going just again to start it, so it can be able to fetch the additional information of the cloud gateway. All right, now that it's started, you can see that this one is still running and the department service is still running. So if I just refresh here Eureka, you should be able to see that I still have that particular department service registered. So what we are going to do is going to be very simple, and by starting the API gateway. So what I'm going to do is go to src main java and start the configuration of the API gateway by running this one. All right. So as long as you configure everything as I have configured, the application should be able to be okay and able to load the information that we require, and everything will be okay. As you can see, it has been able to obtain the and also register itself to the gateway as demo API gateway, and you can see that we have the port being read as 7000, and that is what is on the config server. So let's just do one single test of fetching the departments which are within this one. So what I'm going to do is going to be very simple. I'm going to go to the browser and I'm going to do localhost. I'm going to access this one via the API gateway 7000/API/department. Alright, so I'm going just to make a get call to this endpoint, and you can be able to see that I'm able to get data. And that is how we can be able to make use of this to expose all our microservices by just configuring the different routes and linking the different services. You are able to make use of the API gateway. So there are different predicates. So if you just want to, you can be able to make use of a certain predicate and specify the route. You can make use of the method. So if it's a post request, so there are some instances whereby you need to configure a service for reading the database and a service for writing to the database. And in that case, what you usually do, maybe they are connected to different databases, then what you need to do, you can configure the method, and whenever that particular path verb, the request verb is matched, then it will be automatically redirected to the actual service that you specified or the actual URL. All right. So that's all for now. We'll be able to see how then we can be able to have the department service and also the employee service which requires to make the call to the department service configured in our next session. Thank you for watching the video. Remember to subscribe, share, like, and comment. And let me have feedback on what you love me to do next. Thank you.